Okay, so the first project you're going to end up doing, and if you end up seeing this as Stack Store, that's what it used to be called. Now it's called Gray Shopper. So, um, really, in the end, what we're going to be building here, what you're going to be building, is going to be an e-commerce web application. And again, after sort of going through this a few times, there's a couple of things I'll sort of point out that I think helped people in the past get through this. But in the end, these are the requirements, right? So again, in the capstone, you're going to come up with what your own requirements are for whatever the project is. So for this, visitors can browse and they can buy with or without an account. Users can see their ordinary history. There's also this idea of admin users that can actually do things like add products, remove products, delete things. You're going to need to deploy it. Again, this is something that you've looked at already. So I think the deployment should be something that you feel comfortable with. The testing, look, I think a few tests, writing a couple of tests, maybe a couple of Angular tests, so that you're comfortable with the syntax is fine. I'm not going to push you that much on it because I think in the end, it's a short period of time to get this functionality in. I want you to get a little bit more of a comfort zone with testing. In a real world, it would be every time that you would end up creating a feature for this, very often, in the real world environment, people say, well, you really need to have a test for that to make sure that ends up working. Here, I think it's going to be a little bit less of an issue just for time constraints. And again, that's the same thing that happens with the full-time program as well.
Does that mean developing and testing simultaneously?
Usually, in an ideal world, what you end up doing is that you write a test, it fails, you get the test to pass, and you go through this what's called the kind of a red-green cycle of testing. So, ideally you're writing the test first, then you're writing the code that ends up passing the test. Very often, people will write the code first and then go back and end up writing the test. The reason why it's kind of nice to write the test first is that then you know that your code is testable. Sometimes you'll actually do a feature and you'll be like, there's no way that I can test this. There's too many things that are sort of going on there. So the test sometimes forces you into a better architecture, which is nice. So, in the end, it would happen simultaneously. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of product? You decide what you want the product to be. Keep it clean. Again, big part of this is that you're going to be learning from each other as you go along. You're going to be starting out with, you're not going to be building this from scratch. So there's something called FSG that Joe, was one of the instructors here, created, a full stack generator, which will end up generating the bones of an Angular project with Sequelize. So, things that are going to be built in there already is, the idea of logging in and that sort of thing. You're not going to have to reinvent the wheel there, but you're going to have to add everything else. So that's kind of again, there's nothing wrong. By the way, when you go and you look at that generated application, all stuff you've seen before, okay? With the exception of some gulp stuff that you have seen, but there's some more gulp in there that you can sort of dig into, things that we really haven't done, some deployment tasks, which might be sort of minifying assets and that sort of thing, or running tests. Again, you'll see a fairly big gulp file when you end up getting there. A big part of this is also planning, because you're working with a group. So kind of a nice way I started to think about the beginning part of this process. We know that, you're going to have to pick a product, right? So odds are that you're going to end up having both a product model and a category model. And in terms of kind of breaking this up, one thing that I would probably do is to say, all right, well, maybe if there's 3 people working on it, you could sort of divide this up and say, all right, well, you're going to create the API calls or the routes for products, okay? And that person would make sense that they would both do the model and they would end up doing the route, okay? And then someone else can end up focusing on the Angular. side of things. And again, I've showed you before where even if the back end is not built out, you could use that you could create your factories on the front end and just end up returning a promise with fake data, just to make sure that things are working, okay? And just so you know, when you think cart, people putting items in carts, think source of truth. There's going to be this cart that's going to be used in your application. You'll see what's in your cart when you go to the cart page, but very often you want to have something on the top of your app that shows the number of items in your cart, and source of truth works pretty well with something like that. But again, that's also another thing. Like someone you could say, well, we're going to have this idea of a cart that's going to end up, calling this endpoint. And again, you can sort of break things out. So again, what you want to do is break things out into manageable pieces. And we'll talk a little bit about how to use Git. What you're going to end up doing is creating branches to do this. And, we weren't doing this before where everyone was working off the master branch. That could be a little bit tricky. So, for instance, if Joe's got the job of doing the server-side portion of products, he's going to create a branch. The branch might be called, products route. And he's going to create the model, he's going to create the route for the products, and he's going to create a branch. And the way that it works with Git is you end up making a pull request, and what ends up that pull request, since the terminology is a little bit weird, but if you sort of think about it, you have this master branch, and the pull request basically says, I want someone to pull this branch, pull it in to the master branch. And that's where that sort of terminology ends up coming from. So the idea is that you don't want to have, in a development environment, I feel very strongly about this. You don't want to have these huge branches. You want to break things down into small pieces, because what happens when a branch gets too big is that someone's working on it for a long time, and by the time that they're ready to merge their branch in, they're ready to pull it in, there's a lot of other changes that ended up getting made, and they've got to resolve a lot of conflicts. But if there's small branches, and we know that Joe's just working on the server side and on these sort of isolated files, sure, there could be some conflicts that you end up looking at, but it's going to be minimal if, someone else is just working on the client side part of it. And even on, if there were separate routes, like, maybe someone could do the product route and someone else could end up doing the category route, or someone can end up focusing on, the user route, or someone can end up doing, a different route. And on the client side, you could break up that, that functionality as well. And again, you sort of want to set it up so that there's, I think, the easiest way to do it, so you're not spending a lot of time fighting Git, is to have these sort of small branches without having a ton of code. You could put a couple of tests in there. It's probably, worth taking a look at once you end up getting started. So I think it's actually a pretty fun process. I'm gonna set this up with our teams. We have a small group, so whether or not we do 4-person teams or 3-person teams or a mix, I'm gonna take a look at it. I'm gonna designate someone as a team lead. Don't feel bad one way or the other. If you're dying to be a team lead, then tell me that. And this is just someone maybe to sort of maybe make some decisions on things, and but it's really going to be very collaborative. It's a small group that you're going to be working with. You're going to sort of, again, the whole idea is to say, hey, look, all right, you do this, break it up into these small pieces. There's a couple of different tools that are out there. There's something called Waffle.io that allows you to set up a project, and you basically can create cards for these tasks. And so you can say, hey, look, Joe is responsible for this, Bobby's responsible for this, Will is responsible for this, and you don't have to. You just want to have things in the pipeline that you could end up working on. Again, a lot of time, if you just end up working on this in class, it's not going to work. You have to spend time together on it. And I really, really strongly recommend meeting up outside of class together if you can. You're going to get a lot out of work together. Whether you end up coming in here, whether you go somewhere else to do work, you're going to learn a ton from each other as you do this. So here it says fellow as project manager. I'm going to make one of you guys project managers. Again, because our fellows end up, rotating here. You're going to sort of plan things out. We're going to end up doing some code reviews at certain points. Again, this is only a 3-week project, so there's not going to be a ton of these. When we end up looking at the code reviews, and this, this is kind of open to interpretation. I don't think this has to be necessarily sort of set in stone, but what I'm going to do is after, every week I'll sit down, I'll see where you guys are with the project. I'll end up looking at your code a bit. And, again, the idea that you can end up working on the back end and the front end simultaneously, I think it does end up making sense. Again, as long as there's 2 different people working on it and end up setting it up in 2 different branches. So we'll figure out exactly, how this stuff should end up working. I think this stuff's a little bit easier for the full-time programs because they're on that sort of rigid schedule. So every day they can sort of get together as a group and literally do a stand-up and say, hey, look, what are you? These stand-ups usually encompass basically saying what you're working on. In my company, we actually only have this meeting. A lot of places will do stand-ups every day. That's true sort of agile development, which is something you'll end up learning about. My company, we end up having a meeting every day, which is basically the stuff that people are working on. If there are issues with something that you're doing, this is kind of one of the places where you can end up bringing this stuff up. So, again, this is all stuff that I've mentioned before. Pairing, I think, is great to do. I think it's a little bit tougher with us because we're not here for that many hours. But when we are here, it's good if you guys, pair up with each other to get stuff done. But, when you're here, there's also going to be a lot of planning as to what sort of the next steps are. So the idea here is to deploy. I've never used DigitalOcean, so this is something that I'll take a look at too. I did mention I want you to do a little bit of CI. So there's going to be some tests. I can show you how to set this up, where basically your GitHub is connected to a continuous integration site. So every time that you end up pushing to GitHub, your continuous integration site will end up getting notified, and it'll go and end up pulling your code from GitHub, and will end up running your tests. And this is good to see, so you have some level of confidence that things haven't broken. And more importantly than that, I think when you end up going to a job, more than likely they're going to end up using something like this, so you have an understanding of how things work. And with you guys have done some deployments already, so there's a little less of an issue. One thing's important: deploy early, deploy often. Okay? Don't wait until you build things out a lot and then deploy and brought in other libraries, because then things break. It's not as clear as what they're breaking. Deploy right from the beginning. There's also some other tools that you could look at. Something called Code Climate, which will go and analyze your code, tell you if, hey, look, this file that you have here is too complex, what issues are with your code, and they'll actually give you a grade on your code. Again, things that are less critical, but that are worth definitely taking a look at. So all things that I sort of mentioned before, right? You're going to end up, you don't want to specialize. So you don't want to basically just do all back-end stuff or all front-end stuff. You want to rotate and really get get a real feel for the stack. And again, what I had mentioned before is true now, where when you end up looking, those ideas that sort of you should know by now is that your controllers and your routes on the server side are going to be pretty lightweight. This is going to give you a chance actually to specialize a little bit more and sequelize. The idea that you're going to end up putting in class methods and instance methods and that sort of thing. Your models are going to definitely be they're going to be more complex. So again, you want to do some server-side stuff. You want to do some client-side stuff. You also don't let just one person do the deployment. All you guys should end up doing deployment. And all you guys should get some comfort zone with writing some of the tests. So again, you guys have, you guys know how I end up looking at your code. It's not going to be that different than, that I've done before. But again, you want to basically hit on all the features. You want the code to look good. You want to end up using Git effectively. You want to have some decent project planning. Again, I want you to have some unit testing to get comfortable with the whole environment of how testing works sort of out there in the real world. You don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but just enough so you have some familiarity with it. Both server-side testing, client-side testing. This stuff is going to be set up from the get-go for your application. You're just going to have to be able to add to it. Your schema designs would look pretty good. I mean, you're going to decide what tables you end up needing for this. These are things that you should really think about because that stuff's kind of hard to change. You want things to be RESTful. I don't think you need to see that on the slide. You know that's one of the things that I demanded really from the beginning. You don't want to have code that's duplicate code all over the place. You don't want to repeat yourself. You want things to be pretty dry. You all know about, how to separate functionality. Again, some sort of rules that we could sort of talk about. I mentioned already, you want thin controllers, thick factories, right? You want to have thin routers and thick models, right? Because again, this makes testing easier, and this gives you more reusability.
Are we testing we didn't really learn about Angular testing?
You will learn a little bit more. There's going to be a lecture on it. So you learn a little bit. Just again, you don't have to do a ton of it, but just to test some controllers and some factories, so you're familiar with it. And also, when you end up deploying it, you want to run some server-side tests and some client tests. You want the site to be usable. Security, I would say, again, I'm not terribly concerned that your API is totally locked down. Again, if you put a to-do, hey, look, you should need to be an admin to get to this point. But again, you're going to be presenting something. It's got to, it's a proof of concept. It's got to look good. It's got to work. So, if there's time to add some of these things, that's fine. It's more important to me that you should be aware of it. Right? The whole idea that we can end up using middleware to make sure that you don't end up getting to certain routes based upon either what your role is or whether or not you're logged in and that sort of thing. And this is stuff that we've touched upon and we'll end up looking at again. Again, it's nice. Things should look nice. Always makes it a little bit more pleasant. So I don't have the teams assigned yet. I'm going to end up setting up the teams. Obviously, there's no afternoon training for FSG. We could look at FSG. We could actually even take a look at it tonight. But the workshop is actually opened up, so you can start going in and taking a look at it. Any questions? None?
No.
All right.
I can't believe we're seeing it.